please don't let it be cancer. It's the last thought that I have as I slip into unconsciousness. Hours later, when I wake up in the recovery room, I blink against the bright fluorescent lights. It's the only thing that's clear in the room. Sounds are muffled. I can't tell if there's 10 people in the room, or 3, or 1. I feel as though my body weighs so much it's one with the bed. Just then, a nurse appears into my minuscule field of vision and puts her hand onto my shoulder. She says, "Codi, how are you feeling?" I squint to focus on her, and the problem is that I know in that moment she has the answer to the question I've wanted to know for months. I muster every bit of energy that I can, and I focus on her face and I ask that dreaded question. Do I have cancer? Her hand slowly squeezes my shoulder, and she says a clinical answer. During your surgery, we ran a biopsy on the tumor, and the doctor is certain, fairly certain, that no, you don't have cancer. A surge of relief runs through every fiber of my body. She repeats herself. So, Codi, how are you feeling? And I say the only thing that comes to my mind in that moment. Who cares? Because at that point in time, all that mattered was the answer to that question. All that mattered was that I didn't have to face the battle that so many lived and die through when that answer is different than the one I had received. Now, perhaps my experience with that question was slightly jaded because, you see, my professional employment, I had been a funeral director and bomber for years prior. And so I'd seen families, I'd experienced their loss with them, and I understood the pain of that experience. But what's interesting is that after an entire career surrounded by death, most people would think that all of that had taught me everything I knew about dying. But the truth was, my experience in that world taught me everything about living. It taught me one of the most powerful lessons I have ever learned, and that is to live with more power and more presence every single day. And it was in those moments, in that conversation with the nurse, that I vowed to do just that. Months later, I was back working in the funeral home, and I found myself doing my daily routine, conducting funerals. And I stood outside of the chapel and I listened to the story of a man whose funeral was being held, and the eulogies were pretty exquisite. They described this man as someone who was loyal and compassionate, who had a heart full of love. Something about this eulogy, while I'd heard thousands before that, just struck me. And I had a thought. I hope they have told this gentleman what they felt about him before right now. It was in that very moment that I actually realized everything I had ever connected to the word legacy was that it was something that came after we are gone, once we're dead, that it's something we leave behind. And I realized how powerful it could be if we shifted the narrative from something we leave to something we live every single day. I like to call it living your everyday legacy, showing up more powerfully and more purposefully right now, every single day, and helping people to understand the impact that they have in your life to create a ripple effect of goodness in the world. When I sat around those arrangement tables at making arrangements, funeral arrangements with families. One of the things that I often heard are something that I like to call echoes of regret. I often heard things like, I wish I hadn't gone to bed angry. Or, I wish we'd taken that trip. Or, I wish I'd said I love you just one more time. And a tiny little voice in my head always said, why did you? Or why didn't you? And I realized that when we are able to shift that narrative around legacy, when we live more purposefully, when we don't let things from our daily mundane get in the way, when we don't allow arguments to last, and we let love be present in our lives with the people who mean something to us, it changes our world like that. That when we start to live our legacies instead of leave them, magic can happen and purpose can fill our lives. Thank you.